Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Church Leadership Lab. We are glad to be with you. Our goal on this podcast is to have conversations that empower healthy churches. So that's what we are all about. My name's Scott, and I'm one of your hosts. And this is Casey, the other one of your hosts. Hey, Casey.
The other one. What's up, Scott? How are you?
The other one. We're the hosting duo, I guess you could say.
You know what you haven't said yet? Which I'm about to ruin
What?
it. You have not yet said something cheesy like the hostess with the mostest or anything like that.
That's true.
Like it's coming one day, but you haven't dropped any of those.
I have too much respect for our audience, Casey.
For the audience, not respect for us or our
to go there. Yeah. Not for myself, but for the audience. Yeah. They don't have time for such cheesiness.
What if they do?
Maybe they do.
That's like the only thing they've wanted from you all along. It's like, man, if only you were cheesy, I would listen to this show.
I know. I'll check the reviews, and maybe that's some of the
this
feedback
one.
that we've gotten.
Somebody's going to comment. I'm going to have to pay somebody to comment and be like, that's what I've been waiting for.
Yeah. Now I'll share with my friends.
Finally. You're welcome.
Oh, man. Well, today we are excited to have a conversation with Drew Young. Drew is the systems manager at Christ the King Community Church in Bellingham, Washington. He's steeped in all things related to data and the church, and really has a passion to help the church better know and understand those that they're caring for. Drew actually works remotely from the hot, sunny desert of Phoenix, Arizona, where he is currently sweating, and enjoys adventuring outdoors, spending time with close friends. Drew, welcome to the show.
It's so good to be here, Scott. Thanks.
Yeah. So in Phoenix, what's the current temperature right now?
It's actually cooled down to about 99, so we're doing really good.
This is what I love. Anybody who lives in like an unbelievably hot state,
Yes.
it's like Dallas or Phoenix or whatever, like New Mexico. Anyway, it's always like it's actually cooled down, and then it's like still an obscene number that the rest
100.
of the country is like, I don't understand how you live there.
Well, yeah, you like in the summer, you can go outside at 3 a.m. and it's still 102. And you're like, great, this is really nice. And they say, it's a dry heat. And really, that's a really nice way to convince lots of people to move there. But I don't think it means anything, honestly.
It's such a scam.
Yeah.
I lived in dry heat before, and it felt like I was constantly being cooked in a frying pan.
Yes.
I was like, it's dry, but still hot as the surface of the sun.
So the first church that I worked at, we had a secretary who would she was famous for dash cookies. She would put cookie dough on her dashboard in the morning. And then about noon, 1 o'clock, she would walk around and hand out cookies that she had baked on her dashboard.
Is that like a thing? Do people do that?
She's like in her 80s. So I feel like when you get to that point, you just do,
you do
right?
whatever you want.
You do whatever you want, right? That'll probably be Casey, honestly.
I want to. That is my only goal. I just want to live to an adorable age where I can do things like that. And they're like, "Oh, that's just old Casey."
Casey, what are you gonna do? Yeah,
she's the hostess with the mostest. Then you'll finally get your title, Casey.
Yeah, you just say the wildest thing. You should bake cookies in your car. Like that's just old so and so. Like that's a great age to live to.
Yeah, they've earned. With all the years that they've lived, they've earned us just being like, that's cool.
That's just them.
We love it. Yeah, that's awesome. Well, Drew, we're going to jump in talking about all things data, systems, website, church management software, all the good stuff, live streaming. Before we do, though, we'd like to ask everyone this question. What's something that doesn't make the public bio that all your friends and family would know about you?
Oh, this is such a good question. I thought about this a lot. I think for me, I didn't get my license until I was 20. I did not have my driver's license. And the reason that's so funny now is because I'm a traveling wizard now. Like I have road tripped across the country 4 times. I've flown all over the world. But I grew up in these really small towns where you could walk to the grocery store, you walk to school. I was a Midwest kid growing up and just really small towns where you didn't have to drive. And so I never wanted to. And then one day I was like, okay, I should probably, get out and see the world. And then I just never stopped driving. So
yeah. you're making up for lost time. You're like, I should just drive across the country 4 times now.
Totally. Yeah. And I've moved cross country like 3 times. So,
okay.
Yeah.
I feel like there's two very different sides of that, where people that grow up in like New York, Chicago, people like, I don't have a driver's license. I've never owned a car. I've never needed one. It's not at all a thing. And then I moved to Nashville, and I really thought this lady was kind of teasing me because I didn't know about this, but they're talking about like 13, 14-year-olds that have license, but it's like an agriculture license or a farming something like when kids live so far away from a rural area and still live on like working farms, they can get licensed at an obscenely young age. Yeah. I thought she was joking. Like that's a whole realm. Like, what do you mean? That does not feel safe at all. But like, no, they get up and they have to drive down to the feed store or whatever. Right. Like they're 12 and like, yeah, it's a whole thing. Did not know about that.
Yeah. Yeah. And especially going to Europe, traveling in Europe, nobody has their license, right? They're like, I take the train to school. I'm like, you take a train just casually, right? You're like, okay, that's cool.
Well, they also take trains to other countries and back in the afternoon. So yeah, like we also don't really have room to talk there. But.
Yeah. Yes, for sure.
It's a little different. The best I can do is take a train to like Wisconsin, but not another country.
There you go.
Hey, there's a lot to say about Wisconsin. I have nothing negative to say. I don't know a thing about it. So I'm not going to knock
That's all I know. All I know is Wisconsin cheese. So
yeah, that's awesome. I lived there for 3.5 years or so. So highly recommend.
Now I know more about Wisconsin than I did an hour ago, as I know someone who used to live there.
There you go. Well, as much as I'm sure people would love us talk about driving in states and all the above, I do want to jump into kind of the meat of our conversation, what we're talking about. And I know it's going to center around, and I love kind of in your bio, it said, really understanding and knowing the people that you're caring about. And in the digital age that we live in, a huge part of that is your digital life and the how you're interacting with a church and the things that you're doing. And I know, a major part of that's a website, and that's obviously the place that most people might go first. So for you, Drew, the first question I'd love to hear is how can churches use their website better as their front door? I actually had a conversation just recently with a church leader who was like, we have a website. This is what we used it for before, but we kind of understand that needs to change because people's behavior has changed. So as people are thinking about, man, how can we actually do this? What advice and kind of wisdom would you share with them?
Gosh, I think the first quote I remember from my very first executive pastor, he looked at me one day, we were starting to work on our website, and he said, "Don't put the bedroom in the front yard," which I always thought was such a good picture of how we think about websites. And what's been interesting for me working in ministry for now almost a decade, you start to lose the perspective of a first-time person. I think it gets harder as you get deeper into ministry because you think more like a staff person, a church person, and not that first-time guest, right? So for me, I think the front, I love your front door analogy, Scott. It just resonates with me because to me, it really is. It is often the first place that you meet people. There's like so many statistics that Barna's come out with that most people, I think it's something like upwards of 70% of people will visit your website, watch an online service, read your about page, all these things before they ever step foot in your door, which is sort of a radical shift from, if you think about like 90s church culture and 2000s church culture, right? One, and nobody even knew what the internet was. But two, a lot of people just came because that's what people did, right? And now that's not our culture anymore. So I think it's more important than ever that really when we think about the front door, it's what is that person who's maybe never been to church or is coming to your church for the first time? What's their experience? Rather than the sort of maybe Sunday school model of church websites, right, where you're putting the bulletin on the front page, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think too that what shifted post 2020 is, I mean, for the most part, it was tough to go find content from a church as far as like, what does the service look like? Like podcasting obviously was a thing. And I think some did that, some didn't. But it's just become common now to know I mean, everything shifted online that wasn't previously. So now it's like, well, yeah, I can sort of experience all of this, but we do that with other things, right? I can experience this restaurant ahead of time, seeing what does it look like? What do people say? I can look at their Instagram feed, whatever. But yeah, it's one of those shifts too, where like, well, now that's available and you have that on there, even if you think your, Facebook live streams go away, they don't. And so people can now access that. And it kind of requires a new mindset then to understand, how do we now engage, interact, create this stuff.
Yeah. And even talking about, restaurants, Scott, I think more than what does it look like, I think in our culture, what we're asking now is, what does it feel like? I think that, people used to do faith and church and religion. That's a big shift because it was the sort of the nominally right thing to do. Right. And I just, people come more. There's lots of studies that show people come because they have a felt need, right? I'm lonely. I'm hurting. I'm sad. I'm angry. I went through loss. I'm grieving. Right.
Yeah.
And so what they're looking for is, what is it going to feel like? Am I going to be safe there? Or am I going to feel loved there? And that's a heavy load to communicate, to actually create language and imagery that communicates that is no small task.
Well, I feel like there's kind of like a balance there, right? Like there's that shift from, we go to church out of obedience. I mean, that's how I was raised. I'll age myself. I was that 90s kid. We go because not only did my pastor father say that's what we do on Sundays, but that's what the Bible says. To today, right? These felt needs, what's in it for me a little bit, which is definitely a worldly mindset. And I think there's that balance of, well, how do we be in the world but not of it? Well, we can communicate to a world that lives in a very different, non-obedient, I just go to church because it's the right thing to do. They still need to feel connected. So I think we have a responsibility to be inviting to someone that maybe wouldn't come in the door just because this is the right thing to do, but they need to feel welcome and invite. And I like that you use the word safe. I think that's really interesting.
Yeah.
Well, I'm curious, have you seen anyone do that well? Kind of on a website, on that front door, be able to communicate both visually, not writtenly,
verbally or
verbal. I know. I was gonna say verbally. I'm like,
yeah.
Communicate through written word, through image, through video, through all of that,
text,
and do it really well to where you're like, man, if I put myself in that chair, somebody who's wondering what this is like, I would really feel it.
Gosh, I mean, I think we can learn a lot from brands. Like I think the church can learn a lot from some big brands. You look at Nike, you look at Apple, you look at some of the big brands of the world, and what you learn from them. And I really, really loved some of my top book picks, Story Brand by Donald Miller. But the idea that everything you're doing is telling story. And so you've seen all of these big brands, all of the sort of commercial world has gone towards storytelling, right?
Yeah.
Meet this athlete, meet this person, and it's everyday ordinary people. And I think when you start to tell those stories, and there's lots of churches that have done this really, really well. Like I've seen so many churches that I've just, I've never been to their church, but yet I'm crying over somebody's, testimony story, right? I'm like, oh, I want to go to that church, right? Because they found Jesus in this small group or on a Sunday morning, right? So I think that storytelling is one of the big answers to how do we meet people right where they are. People want to see people that look like them. And I think like to creating that safe environment, I think that's a huge thing is like, do I see somebody that looks like me, that has my story that I can identify with?
Yeah, that's really good. Now, what about like, so we have that front door and you could even say, I think you mentioned it, whether it was watching a stream. So you kind of have your website, your live stream, that front end. But I know that especially as we dig into talking about data, like understanding that there's that back end, church management software for most. How can churches use that front end and the back end together to better connect with people, understand where they're at, like actually care for them?
Oh, I ignored this for years. It's really funny. I started out, I was a content guy. So I'm a people person first. I started out and I said, I really want to serve people. I really want to serve people. And so I was very people facing. I was doing a lot of media, social media, video production, graphic design, all of the content world, right? And I kind of hit this wall where I was like, well, who are we talking to? Right. Mm-hmm. And then I started doing this digging of like, who's our audience? Who are we talking to? What are they feeling? What do they need? Because maybe nothing of what I'm making, you know, all these hundreds of posts I've scheduled, like, are they actually like reaching people? Yeah. And as I started digging more and asking more questions, I kept finding less and less answers. Yep. And realizing, oh, our church management system is a glorified phone book, right? Like it was like, oh, that's where I go to look up people's phone numbers or addresses because we still mail things twice a year, right? So I was like, man, how do we, like, there's got to be a better way to do this. And I think what clicked for me is, oh my gosh, the more we know about people, the better we can care for people. Mm-hmm. And it can feel, you know, people get really nervous about this, especially in the church, because it can feel big brothery, right? They're like, well, I don't want to, you know, I know there's some churches that are like tracking people that are on their Wi-Fi. I'm like, okay, I don't know how I feel about like, you know, I'm on your Wi-Fi, but the principle is so cool that the more data you have, the better you can actually show up and love people well. And that was what clicked for me.
Yeah.
I love that you mentioned the Wi-Fi thing. Like that's genuinely something that I've looked into. And like we do software. We're the back end. We know that Ministry Brands provides the software. It's the back end, kind of the less exciting stuff. But we talked to another company that was like, we can tell you everyone that joined your network and then automatically create a record for them in your CHMS. And like my instinct was like, that's creepy. But then exactly to your point, I was like, well, how much are we doing that everywhere we go? And from the church's perspective, when it's who is coming? Why are they connecting? What pages on our websites are they linking to? What small groups are they searching for? Man, can I not be a creep, but can I connect people in the ways that they need to? Can I anticipate a need and then meet it because somebody walked in our door? And if I don't know they walked in our door other than, hey, they connected to our Wi-Fi network, like it's kind of cool. It's still a little creepy, but it's also really kind of exciting when you think like, well, what are we doing with that data? Who's the person behind that IP address or whatever? Like it kind of gets pretty powerful if you think about it.
Yeah. And I do think that's like, Drew, I think that's such like a massive mindset shift that to me is like kind of the future of like, how do we use these digital tools in church? And it's not, well, I need a phone book. I need, you know, all this information. Obviously that stuff's good. Like that's kind of the floor, right? But this idea of, okay, now how do we use this to proactively love, care, disciple, pour into people? And it is, I think there's needed to be some time to realize like, that's not unethical. That's not, and we're talking about information like, did somebody attend this class? Did they fill out this form? How did they, you know, that sort of thing. But I think that is massive. My question then is like, what are some implications of that mindset shift? Like, how do people then interact with their software and then with the actual data differently once they sort of make that shift?
Yeah, I was just thinking about, you know, great example of this is Easter. You know, we Easter's we used to call it the Super Bowl of church, right? It's you have people that only come twice a year. And so if you really think about it, 2 times a year, you have the biggest opportunity to capture sometimes hundreds of people that could just easily slip out the back door, right? It's so easy for them to just show up on Easter and then poof, they never come again. And you don't know their name and you don't know their story. So, you know, the first I think is the ask. We got really intentional, especially during COVID when it's really hard to connect. We had to come up with new digital ways to, hey, fill out this connection card. We'd love to, the language we use is we would love to get to know you and hear your story, right? Mm-hmm. I think the gimmick era of this is over, and that's a bold statement, but the like, come get a mug and a cookie from the, like, I don't need another coffee mug. Casey doesn't need another coffee mug. I hear she has several large Yetis already. So, I think that era is over. If people know your intention is really to know them and to hear their story and connect with them, I think that's huge. And to make the ask, we sort of had it printed in fine print somewhere, kind of hoping that people would just come. And I think you really have to go to people. So that's the first one. And the second thing I would say is track everything. We talked about, we would say, okay, we want this many baptisms this year. Like, we have a goal to have this many people baptized. And I started asking, well, how many salvations did we have? Because the reality is, if you know how many people came to Jesus, you have a prime audience to say, hey, would you be interested in taking that next step in baptism? But you can't ask those people if you don't know. And so we, to me, it was like every time we'd come across something that I was like, oh, I'd love to know that. We use a system called Rock as our database, which I know a lot of churches are using. And we make attributes for people every time we think of something that we might want to know in the future. Baptism dates, salvation dates, when they joined a small group, when they became a member, all of the sort of spiritual milestone pieces. Because we know we can cross-reference those down the road to reach a whole different group of people, right?
Yeah.
Well, that's the whole part of your story. You just talked about some of the most powerful brands, they tell stories. If we don't know these, the word milestone, things that I can celebrate with you, that is part of your story.
Yeah.
Again, aging myself, but Facebook, I never use it. But when it gets me is when it shows pictures of my daughters from this is what happened 2 years ago. Mm. And I pause. I'm like, they were so little. It's an emotional moment because you forget about it. Time happens so quickly, but something stopped and put in front of my face a milestone. Yeah. And I had an emotional connection to it. So then what do? Of course, I share it with my family, oh my gosh, look how little the girls were or whatever. So how much more powerful is it when my house of worship is saying, hey, we noticed this happened. We want to celebrate that with you, but here's what's next. Because what if I have no idea? What if I have no idea that after I give my life to Jesus, hey, the next thing might be water baptism. It might be a discipleship class. Right. We make the assumption that all of us are church kids. A lot of people have no idea what the next step is. And I'm kind of waiting for something here's the recipe. Follow here if you're ready. If I have no idea what to do, I might be waiting for somebody to be like, hey, here's what you do next. Thank you. I didn't know. And I didn't know how to ask.
Yeah. And the way you show up in those moments matters so much. Oh my goodness. Even knowing that day that somebody decided to follow Jesus, we develop a 3-month check-in process with people because we know that after that moment, it's scary. People go forward, they make that decision. And if we're not careful, within 90 days, we've lost them. Right. Yeah. And so even to stay engaged in their story, hey, a month ago, you made that decision. Hey, 3 months, even a year. Hey, a year ago, you made that decision. Hey, you've been following Jesus for a year. Congratulate, right? Mm-hmm. All of those moments where you get to celebrate those milestones with people. Yeah, Casey, are so good.
Well, you're kind of answering this directly, but lean into that a little bit more tactically. What are some literal first baby few steps that church leaders can begin to implement to improve the way that they capture that, the way that they organize that data and actually use that? You guys do it really, really well because you've done it intentionally and you have the systems, but baby steps, where do I even begin going, whoops, I'm not doing that?
Casey knows the story. I got trapped in a Tesla once, and I couldn't figure out how to get out.
Call it out. I was not going to call this out.
I literally got in. It's sweltering hot. I'm stuck in the car. I can't figure out how to open the door because it's too futuristic, and I somehow accidentally turned the air conditioning off. Right. But this is a picture I think of how we feel with technology. Sometimes it can be so overwhelming, and we get trapped in it. Right. So I think my first, the smallest bit of advice is use what you have, use what you know. some of this is very relational, right? If you're tracking those dates, go back, every couple of weeks, look at when people got saved, follow up with those people with a phone call, right? We start very relational. We call people, we text people. Like, this is the era that we're in. So I would say do the thing that's most comfortable to you first. Because I think it's really important that you feel comfortable with the technology if you don't feel comfortable with it, it's really hard to bring people along. So start small, start with the phone call, start with the text, take notes on all those things. This is a really big one for us. Oh my gosh, note everything on our person records, on our person profiles, every time we make a phone call or a text. I called, Susan today, and we talked about her baptism, and she's interested in joining a small group, right? Because then for another pastor to come back and be able to see that is huge. So I would say just start really small, and start really relational. And then automation is your friend too, right? So email's not dead. Do that drip campaign. Send, 5 emails after somebody gets saved or baptized. I think we have to leverage everything we have if we're going to really reach people.
Yeah, and I think that's a great reminder too for people. The more you embrace software tools does not automatically equal the less human relationship and contact that you have, because what we're not saying is just kind of farm out your discipleship to, church management software automation. That's not what you're doing, but how do you actually use those tools to ensure somebody who just was in the hospital 7 days ago, and you have 500 people and you can't remember all these individual details, but you get a reminder, hey, Susan, Bob, whoever I want to say, was in the hospital. They just got out. Oh, I see these notes of, their small group leader who went and cared for them. I'm going to shoot a quick email, just say, hey, thinking about you, praying for you, love you. How can we serve you? That's where you're still human. You're still a church leader, shepherding, caring for somebody, but using these tools to do that in a way that might have slipped your mind. You got to forgotten about whatever, 5-10 years ago.
I think the larger our churches get, first of all, that's wonderful. Growth is fantastic, but the older I get, the worse my memory is. I can't remember 5,000 people's names, their birthdays, all those things. So I love these that take notes and use them. Everybody loves a cheat sheet, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. So on the opposite of that, a little bit of a what not to do moment. A couple years ago, my life turned upside down and visited a handful of churches looking for a new church home. Visited the same place about 3 or 4 times with my kids, but then we moved on. And a year later, just a couple weeks ago, actually, I got this random phone call. The person did not introduce themselves or say where they were from. Just leaned right into, hey, we noticed that you have a student that's about to be entering middle school. We wanted to make sure. And I was like, I am so sorry. Who is this? Where are you calling from?
Yeah.
I'm having to feed, and in my head, knowing what I do for a living, I'm like, you did not check. You just had a list. You had a list of people to call. You did not look. When is the last time this family attended? Are they in any groups? For all intent and purposes, I don't attend your church, but you just called making all these assumptions. And I went, man, first of all, I have found a wonderful church home. We're plugged in. But if I were still searching for a place to feel loved and safe, I kind of hung up going, man, I almost wanted to call them back and be like, hi, I work for church software. And I got to tell you, this was such a missed opportunity. And I want you to get this right because you're an awesome church in my community. But that could have left such an unfortunate experience for me of going, they don't know who the heck I am. And they just want me to come and attend some random thing. They have no intention of loving my family because they just didn't notice. They haven't been here in a year. So using that data to help you have an informed conversation to be the church, not just make a bunch of phone calls and, miss the opportunity to love somebody.
And I think your heart posture towards that interaction is really beautiful, to say like, oh, what a missed opportunity. But the reality is, for someone who has maybe struggled with faith, they might not have that kind of reaction, right? And no pressure to the church leader listening, but it is a huge responsibility, because when that happens, it doesn't just influence the way they see your church. It influences the way they see the church. And that's why we have such a responsibility to steward people well.
Well, we talk a ton about the burden and responsibility on church leaders, and the weight of the calling, the weight of the life of a full-time minister, burnout, all these things. So using these tools to not make your life harder, but actually make it easier, so that every phone call is a quality one, every outreach is quality, making your life better, not, leaving these. We talked about restaurants. How many bad reviews do you leave versus a good one? We don't often sing the praises. We're like, this was not great. I'm not going around telling people the name of this church that called me, but if my heart were still hurt, my former pastor always said, people are looking for a reason to not like church when they walk in. We're looking for every reason to give them a good experience. It kind of stinks that we have to do that, but that's the world we live in. So why not use tools to try to end on a good note, not dig a deeper hole.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a lot of helpful stuff in our conversation, and hopefully some ways for church leaders to kind of take those steps wherever they are. Drew, one thing we ask all of our guests, I'd love to ask you, in your opinion, what's one essential component of a healthy church?
Oh, one of my favorite people, Derek Archer, one of our executive pastors, he always says, we don't focus on growth, we focus on health, because healthy things naturally grow. Mm-hmm. And that one phrase has really just revolutionized the way that I look at ministry. We can get the metric all backwards and think it's about numbers and I mean, it's so easy to do in the church, and especially in the data world, right? Like we sit behind the screen as people who are in church tech and communications. We're looking at analytics, we're looking at reach, we're watching these little line charts go up and down, right? And it's so easy to think it's about the numbers, but man, it's really about what those numbers tell us about how healthy we are. And so, man, I think the biggest paradigm shift is to flip that script and to go, not what are the numbers, but what are the numbers teaching us? And how can we be healthier? Because when we're healthy, if we go back to, this is the book of Acts, right? You see disciples making disciples making disciples. And if we can go back to that model, man, I think growth just comes as a byproduct.
Yeah, that's good. Well, let's do this. Let's jump into our last little section. We call it our final five. These are rapid fire, a little quicker, and we'll go through these. The first one is this. What's one book that you'd recommend to church leaders?
Oh, gosh. Anything by Donald Miller. I love StoryBrand. I'm reading Blue Like Jazz right now, but Donald Miller, I think, has so much to teach about how we can tell better stories as a church and meet people where they are.
Nice.
All right. The last time you were locked in a Tesla and you turned on the radio or plugged in your iPod, what is the last thing you listened to? Spotify, Apple, whatever.
My favorite podcast, Everything Happens with Kate Bowler. 10 out of 10 would recommend. I think I got Casey hooked on it too.
Yes.
I thought you were going to say your favorite podcast, Church Leadership Lab.
Second. Very close second.
Close second. Yeah.
little shocked over here.
I really do have to pause. And absolutely, when I met Drew, he introduced me to that, and it has quickly become an obsession for me. And every episode is fantastic. And bought the shirt, the mug, the t-shirt. I am now a raving fan. So that's totally endorse that.
Nice. What is your favorite piece of technology?
Oh, AirPods. Hands down. I need 3 pairs because I can't keep the battery charged fast enough.
It's an endorsement.
Yeah.
You just named a great one from your pastor, but is there another piece of advice that has really stuck with you over the years? Oh,
gosh, there's so much. There are so many good things. Maybe this is a cop out for answering that, but I just think leaning into hard conversations teaches you so much. For me, there's 1,000. It's hard to just pick one because there's like a Rolodex. Boy, that ages me. There's a Rolodex full of things in my mind, little things that people have said that have made a huge difference. And so, man, just to lean into those conversations and really listen, I think is so good.
Yeah, that's awesome. All right, one last thing that you'd like to communicate to our audience of church leaders.
I would say, gosh, we are in such a world of difference right now, in the church, outside of the church. I think it's easy to get sort of scared and believe that we're more divided than ever. But really, Casey, you use the word opportunity, and I love that. I think we have more opportunity than ever. So, man, for me, it's let's go after the one, right? I mean, we always talk about Jesus, the 99 and the one. But for me, the big thing I'm thinking about this year is how do we go after the one, the lost, the person who feels like they don't fit in or they don't belong? How do we lean into difference and meet people who might not ever show up in our building? Yeah,
that's awesome. Well, thank you for taking the time today to share your wisdom, to share your experience, your knowledge, what you've learned and what you're seeing too, as we're kind of stepping into. If people wanted to either follow along, connect with you, how would they do that?
Yeah, I'm on Instagram, DrewYoung95, or you can email me, DrewY@ctk.church. I would love to connect with you and share any little bits of wisdom that I've gleaned over the years.
Awesome. Well, we'll link to those in the show notes for sure. But again, Drew, appreciate you taking the time. And we thank those of you listening today, and we hope that this has been helpful. Again, our goal is conversations that empower healthy churches. So hopefully that has helped with that goal today. And if so, we'd love for you to like, subscribe, share, leave a review, do all of the things. We promise some more cheesy banter if you do. But we would love to get this into as many church leaders' hands and ears as we can, so that we can help as many churches and empower as many healthy churches as we can. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, guys.
This episode of the Church Leadership Lab podcast is brought to you by Ministry Brands, the largest provider of church technology software. Over 90,000 churches rely on Ministry Brands for their single platform solution that brings together all the digital tools a church needs. From online giving to websites to church management software and more, Ministry Brands is leading the way in simple to use, innovative solutions, all with the goal of empowering healthy churches. To learn more, visit ministrybrands.com.